Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
What's better than enjoying a derivative of a classic slasher movie for Halloween? How about a derivative of a slasher movie, filled to the brim with all the 80s camp, cheesiness, and mullets you could ever hope for? Sleepaway Camp may be unknown to many, but it's garnered a cult following over the years. Its schlocky execution, endearing setting, and creative kills, complete with some ambitious special effects and a shock twist ending that's still spoken of to this day, make this a guilty pleasure for the horror season.
Turn the wheel! Oh my God!
Let's go. Let's go, Bill. Come on, man. Do it up. Right there, Bill. Go ahead. Yeah, go.
I was exposed to this movie not too long after sitting through the very first horror film in my life, Child's Play. My fragile little brain was completely unprepared for what I had seen, and Chucky gave me nightmares for years afterward, convincing me that my old Cabbage Patch Kids were sitting on my shelf and turning their heads to look at me, forcing me out of slumber many a night in near panic. The only horror I'd ever been exposed to before that was that scene in Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Warriors, where Freddy's consuming Patricia Arquette whole. I was far too young for that, and one glimpse of Freddy swallowing that kid up was enough to traumatize me for life. It stuck with me all these decades later. Well, terror soon turned to fascination, and not long after, one of my favorite pastimes was browsing the horror section in the video rental shop. It felt taboo or something, like the closest you could get to that room in the back with the X's over it. For anyone too young to have experienced this, it might be difficult to understand, but that box art and those screenshots on the back were enough to get your imagination racing. I'd created my own mythology for many of those movies based on the box art alone, and some of it imprinted itself on my brain, like the Black Roses 3D artwork that hinted at untold terrors within. So, when my buddy and I stumbled across Sleepaway Camp one day, we didn't hesitate to rent it. What wasn't to love? Camp slashers were already a famous trope at the time, thanks to Jason Voorhees, and that artwork said everything we needed to know. Little did we realize that this campy little horror flick would deliver an experience that would stick with us for years to come.
I'd like to see Mel get his fat ass down here and pick up something. That cheap son of a...
Now, as much as I and many others enjoy the first Sleepaway Camp, I'm not blind. It objectively is not a great movie. It's guilty of all those old 80s tropes we find in cheaply made productions aping other cheaply made productions in an attempt to cash in on the horror craze at the time, and the very generous margin that a slasher flick that was made for pennies could generate back then. Or now. Just ask Art the Clown. Halloween, which started the craze, was made on a budget of around $300,000 and famously used the spray painted mask of Captain Kirk that cost a buck 98 to represent the iconic Michael Myers. And John Carpenter wrote the famous theme song in addition to directing and working on the screenplay, which I'm sure helped cut some costs. Halloween ended up grossing $70 million at the box office. The first Friday the 13th had a budget of $550,000 and ended up grossing almost $60 million. So you can see the appeal for someone like Robert Hiltzik, who wrote and directed Sleepaway Camp, which released in 1983. Sleepaway Camp had a budget of $350,000 and ended up grossing $11 million. Not bad. But despite the shoestring budget, or perhaps because of it, Sleepaway Camp ended up with so much charm in its campiness and creative special effects, which required some inventive thinking on the part of FX artist Ed French. It's because of that tight budget that we even got some of the more memorable scenes in the movie, including the twist ending with its haunting imagery. But I'll get to that in a bit. Ed's special effects work on the movie elevated it from just another cheap B-movie horror to something greater, aside from its boundary-pushing story and social aspects. This effect in particular is a standout. There are some gory and inventive deaths in the film, all done by a killer shrouded in mystery until the very end, which is what forms the meat of the story. The film opens to a scene 8 years earlier in 1975, with a father and his two children, a boy and girl, enjoying a day on the lake. Things soon take a tragic turn, as the father and one of the children are killed by some irresponsible teens in a motorboat. This gives us our first Oscar-worthy performance.
Oh my God! Somebody help the people! Oh my God! We need help!
One of many to follow. Fast forward to present, 1983, and we learn that the surviving child has been raised by her somewhat eccentric aunt.
Any chips? Why, of course. I believe there's a whole bag. Why, I'm almost sure of it.
From here on out, the story follows Angela Baker, played by Felissa Rose, who does a pretty excellent job with her haunting stare that persists through most of the film. Angela and her cousin Ricky, played by Jonathan Tiersten, arrive at Camp Arawak for a summer of fun. Ricky's a pretty cool dude, and is always looking out for his cousin. He also doesn't take shit from anyone. Angela is painfully shy and awkward, and quickly becomes a target for bullies, unsympathetic camp counselors, and
fresh chicken. Where I come from, we call them baldies.
I'm Chris Hansen. No, you're not. Is I? No, you're not. Is I?
as tensions rise and the bullying intensifies, campers and staff members start to drop in creative and gruesome ways. The camp's owner, Mel, spends most of the movie desperately trying to deny that his campers are getting murdered so that he doesn't lose his business. And when he isn't doing that, he's undertaking some extracurricular activities with a counselor about 3 times younger than him. There's one honest counselor, Ronnie, who does his best to keep things under control, but isn't very successful. Angela eventually bonds with one of the boys at the camp, Paul. And we as an audience are given a hint that not everything is as straightforward as it might seem, when people start complaining that Angela never goes swimming or showers with the others.
Are you going in the water or aren't you? Huh? God damn it, answer me, Angela, answer me! God damn it, answer me! What the hell's going on here? The little bitch won't answer me, she never answers me!
It turns out that everyone who's ever bullied or wronged Angela ends up dead, and Mel figures it's the overprotective Ricky who's been offing the offenders. It's about this time that the killer really cuts loose and starts to go on a rampage, even hacking up some innocent kids camping in the woods. This part always felt a little weird to me, because it's pretty random. All the other people who are killed at the camp are those who wronged Angela. So when these little tykes get hacked apart for no reason, it doesn't really make sense. And if memory serves, I think the director himself said that he kind of regretted that scene. When Angela's main tormentor, Judy, bites it, it's one of the more extreme kills, at least in concept, than a lot of what we were getting at the time. Yeah, that's going where you think it is. Well, Mel's finally had enough and takes Ricky out for a beating, which is when we're clued in that the killer really isn't Ricky, but someone else all along.
It can't be you. It can't be. It can't be.
The two-timing Paul is patiently waiting for Angela at the lake when she shows up and uncharacteristically wants to go swimming. Meanwhile, a police officer shows up in response to the murdered younglings, and he stumbles upon Ricky, who survived Mel's wild assault. The movie comes to an incredibly twisted and unnerving ending when Ronnie and another counselor find Angela cradling Paul's head in her lap. And we're given a flashback to Auntie and the surviving child from 8 years ago. Only the one who survived wasn't the girl, it was the boy, Peter, who was raised as a girl because of his aunt's delusional and selfish desire. Cut to a bloody Angela standing naked on the beach with Paul's decapitated head at her or his feet, and junk on full display. Angela emits this savage growling and this fiercely primal look on her face. As Ronnie states the obvious.
Oh my God, she's a boy.
The frame freezes on Angela's manic expression as the credits roll. It's a gloriously fucked up ending which really makes the whole movie, and I'm sure it'll ruffle some people's feathers nowadays with what it's getting at. But no matter how you interpret the ending reveal, that ghastly expression and inhuman growling, coupled with the blood and shock of seeing Angela like that, make for a memorable moment, and I can see why it's still talked about today. When I first saw that when I was much younger, I was completely unprepared for it. The movie, while having some pretty gnarly kills, isn't that explicit in other ways. There's no real nudity in the movie until that point, and when that end scene zooms out to reveal Angela's bloody and oddly disproportionate body, it's a shock. It certainly burned itself in my brain way back when, and shows just how much this movie pushed the boundaries in a host of different ways. On a side note, there's an interesting story about that end scene. Because Felissa Rose was too young, the director hired a college student to stand in as Angela Peter while wearing a thin cast of Angela's face. The poor dude was apparently so cold and naked and freaked out by the whole process and not sure if he could go through with it. So the crew gave him some liquid courage in the form of a 6-pack and got the scene done while the guy was drunk. It's sort of a comedy of errors, but resulted in a wonderfully messed up part of horror history. This movie encapsulates the 80s. Or maybe it's that period of time when the 70s were transitioning to the 80s. Because I grew up then, and while I do remember it being a thing, I don't remember too many people actually wearing shirts like this in my neighborhood. Something that sets Sleepaway Camp apart is that there are actually age-appropriate actors playing the teens, unlike many other contemporary movies where the teens are played by 20 or 30-year-olds. Although there is a pretty big age range, which often looks hilarious. Like, I don't know if these dudes should still be in summer camp. You're a bit old for that. The acting is pretty terrible all around, but that's part of what gives the movie its charm.
Oh my God. Not you, man. He did this to get back at me.
You know what you're going into with a B movie like this, or you should, and it's fun to watch substandard actors stumble about the woods getting murdered. It's almost like the dodgy acting gives it a more realistic feel. Somehow the characters feel more authentic than in a lot of other B movies, except maybe the aunt, whose acting feels bizarre, almost like she's from a different movie.
Be careful not to tell anyone how you got them. Oh, no, I'm afraid that they wouldn't approve of that at all.
Jonathan Tiersten as Ricky does go all out, and I quite liked his character. And I thought Felissa Rose as Angela did the best job, with her haunting gaze that does come across as unsettling. And I totally get why people would pick on her. I saw a lot worse teasing for less back then. But I think a lot of what makes the movie stand out in horror circles is the pretty great special effects, especially for that time. The practical effects really get the point across, even if the manner of the kills is somewhat hokey. Some of these shots are great. There are some pretty funny moments when the film's low budget necessitated unintentionally hilarious shots. Like this, which is clearly not Angela, but Ricky with a wig on, or this cop's awesome stash. But despite that, Sleepaway Camp uses its low-budget aesthetics to its advantage. The film's simplicity and rudimentary effects give it an almost documentary-like sense of authenticity. The environments feel real and lived in, I guess because it used to be a real summer camp called Camp Algonquin. But the surroundings do look like an actual functioning summer camp populated by campers, making the horror feel more grounded. Instead of relying on elaborate sets, Hiltzik keeps the audience focused on the characters' actions and the social dynamics that gradually deteriorate. And that includes some boundary pushing, at least at the time, sexual commentary. We learn that Angela's father was actually gay, and seeing him and his partner together may have had a psychological impact. Then there's the twist ending, of course, which I won't comment on whether the movie was trying to make a statement about trans people or not. I don't know. But it certainly leans into the idea of psychological damage from being forced into an irregular situation, particularly after a traumatic event like the death of your father and sister. So what starts out as a typical slasher soon turns into something deeper and more disturbing. Sleepaway Camp delves into human vulnerability and the unsettling consequences of trauma. Although its twist may be divisive among some circles, you probably won't forget it. And the film's atmosphere, character dynamics, and unflinching narrative choices make it a memorable horror experience. It's also pretty short, at like an hour and 20 minutes, which is kinda great. Well worth a watch in my opinion, if you have any interest in 80s slashers. With a promising start like that, the other 4 movies must be worthy follow-ups to a somewhat groundbreaking first entry, right?
Where the hell are you? Right here. That's what you get for not obeying your counselor.
Right?
God, that Tony guy is so cute.
He's Mexican.
Screw you, you ugly whore.
Hey, Alan, that's no way to talk to ladies. Boys, wedgie!
Oh no. I do want to get into the sequels sometime, as they're mostly fun in their own right. Mostly.
Son of a bitch. No. I don't know where do I hide? I gotta get away from him.
But that'll be another video for another time. If you stuck around this long, thanks for watching, and let me know what you thought in the comments below.
She takes showers when no one can see. She has no hair down below. Judy! She's a real carpenter's dream. The lattice a board and needs a screw.